Praise the Lord. Today we're going to go ahead and read Genesis chapter 34, 17 to 24. And the title of this is Rewards for Injustice, Not According to Levi and Simeon. And it says, But if ye will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then will we take our daughter, and we will be gone. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And the young man deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. And he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city, and communed with the men of their city, saying, These men are peaceable with us, therefore let them dwell in the land, and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of his city. And every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. Reading again, verse number 17, it says, But if ye will not hearken unto us to be circumcised, then will we take our daughter, and we will be gone. What was the expectation of their answer? It can be assumed that the family of Jacob assumed that they would agree to it. For Shechem must have shown enthusiasm towards getting married to Dinah. Yet it was, as he was to presume, either marriage or no relationship with her at all. For Levi and Simeon, the ones coming up with the details of the agreement, and Jacob their father not stating anything contrary to it, and the rest of the brothers being silent also, it can be assumed that they all had agreed, though some may have thought otherwise, but they did not voice their opinions on the matter. Thus it can be assumed that they, especially Levi and Simeon, would in fact agree to the conditions. If they were not to hearken unto them, then they would have been in a fix, because then they would have had to face them with the idea of killing them all. Nevertheless, their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, who was Hamor's son, that they would agree to the pact, shall we say. Verse 18 says, And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son, even though they were very pleased to hear what Simeon and Levi had proposed to them. They really had no idea of the planned intention of murdering the entire clan in cold blood. Yet at the time, the Mosaic law was not instituted, but from the time of Noah, it was stated in Genesis 9:6. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Thus, one way to look at it was that Levi and Simeon may have received capital punishment for their acts. Another way to look at it was the idea that Levi and Simeon were actually bringing justice upon Shechem. But that doesn't really condone the fact that they had killed every male within that city-state. Genesis 9:6 seems to apply to those who kill the innocent and are not giving justice. In a sense, it may be applied, but God may have overlooked it to be given to Levi and Simeon. For it was, in another way to view it, a form of killing the inhabitants of the land of Canaan in war. for it was a factor to start a war. Some historical wars have started for such things. However, the family leader, Jacob, did not say anything in regards to them to start such a war. Therefore, it was their own will to do as they had done. Jacob then, one can say, had a right to judge them accordingly, but instead of sentencing his sons to capital punishment, he had basically cursed them before he had died along with their descendants. It was true that all of the descendants of Hamor and Shechem had suffered as a result of Simeon and Levi's acts of murdering the males in the city-state. But it seems that it was, to some degree of thought, justified, at least more so in the minds of Levi and Simeon, who could have really been looking out for their sister. Yet nothing is mentioned also of Dinah's thoughts and emotions, whether she would have been in agreement to it or not. It appears that in Jacob's cursing them at the end of his life, maybe Dinah probably felt more inclined to get married than and not worrying so much if she was violated or not. It seems like that she was somewhat in consent with the marriage. If, in fact, that is why Jacob cursed Levi and Simeon. Dinah may have accepted fornication with Shechem, though she may have appeared to her family as having been forced. Yet that is not discussed at all, so the reader is just forced to guess or look at hints in the text. Verse 19 says, "And the young man deferred not to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father." For the fact that Shechem was more honorable, it seems that he wished to restore that honor for what he had succumbed to doing. Yet, in all reality, what Shechem had done was to dishonor himself, dishonor his family, and in consequence, dishonor the entire city-state that they had been a part of. It may have been then that Shechem was stretching for restoring his honor in society, and the best way to do so was to get Dinah's hand in marriage with consent from Dinah's family. Kind of acting, maybe, that he was delighted, but really deep inside, maybe he was just trying to restore his honor. Yet in this scripture, something troubling is brewing. Genesis 34, 25 to 27 says, "And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister." Thus it can be indicated that Dinah did not tell Jacob, her father, of what was done, but that someone else had told him of the violation. The reasoning is because within these verses, Simeon and Levi had to take Dinah out of Shechem's house. So she had been there the entire time, it seems like, from the time that she was, we can say, either violated or consented to fornication or just defiled. Certainly there is some doubt as to Dinah's preference, but Jewish and even Christian scholars believe Dinah was in fact raped. And that is the reason, of course, for the rage of the brothers, more likely than not. Thus, it could be most notably that it was indeed rape, for why was Dinah still in the house of Shechem? that points to either, as they say, Dinah's willingness that she consented to the marriage and she didn't really want to see her family's face at that time, or she was unwilling, but she had no say in the matter. Willingness, she might have felt shame to return to her dad and family in such a condition, and that she may have actually agreed to fornication. However, it may have been that Shechem had told her to stay in his house until he had spoken to her dad and family. In all ways of looking at it, still Shechem was, as he knows he was, guilty of inducing or forcing Dinah to fornication. Yet he did not call the city-state to collaborate with him to murder any of Dinah's family members, so that's, of course, a good thing. He also wanted to make things right. That is also another good thing. But, as it is known, Shechem was guilty. Was Dinah guilty, or was she just raped? Verse 20, it says, And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city, and communed with the men of their city, saying. So Hamor and Shechem both were acting to restore Shechem's honor and the honor of Hamor, for the family of Jacob were against such actions of Shechem, who had in essence dishonored Jacob and the whole family by committing an act of fornication, which was not allowed, it seems, in the culture of Jacob's family. The family culture was that everything had to be discussed beforehand and not taken into the hands of the two that were to get married. Of course, with Shechem, who did as he pleased, it seems, may have thought that the warriors of the city-state would get their way anyhow. But Shechem may have thought that the family of Jacob could be won over. Thus Shechem thought more likened unto a gentleman in trying to repair the damage by getting the consent of the family for such a relationship. Yet the act had already been done. So in one way, he is trying to get consent of the family. Maybe he did try to get the consent of Dinah previously. If he did not, and he just raped her, usually the person who does such a thing really is not looking to get any consent from the rest of the family members. That's a possibility as well. Just the fact that he wants control over the woman, and he doesn't need anybody's permission. The act already had been done. Maybe Shechem's own conscience would not allow him to continue in that light. And so, in a way, he had to discuss with the family of Jacob to get Dinah as his wife. But Shechem knew not really with what type of family he had been dealing with. In essence, it was likened unto Shechem kidnapping Jacob's daughter, for what is surprising also is the fact Dinah was still in Shechem's house during the negotiations, which may have put the family of Jacob in a sense of emotional distress in one viewpoint for Dinah, because she was still in that house and they were coming to negotiate. It's like they got Dinah, so let's negotiate. And in other words, if you don't give me what I want, then we just take her and go. But actually, the taking and going was the conversation from Levi and Simeon. But she was in the house of Shechem still, so that is, or was, a problem. Shechem and Hamor, after receiving the news that Jacob's family was positive about the relationship and that they needed only to do circumcision, them and all the city-state, of course just the men, for such as they wished, then it follows that Shechem and Hamor both thought it a good idea and something that they could persuade also the rest of the inhabitants of the city-state. It seemed easy for them, but for the family of Jacob, they were actually considering other options, though it appeared that the family of Jacob was considering that particular option which they proposed, but that was not the intention, at least with Levi and Simeon. For Shechem had done that to their sister, and we can say Jacob's daughter. What more could those men do to the family? It could have produced even more boldness to run over the family and disrespect them in future by, quote unquote, such sons of Belial, as they say. Verse 21, it says, "These men are peaceable with us, therefore let them dwell in the land, and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters." And so this is a proposal to the men of the city. However, they got the wrong ideas. They think that the men are peaceable. Well, they speak peaceable, but actually inside they were not. Levi and Simeon, that is. Hamor and Shechem thought the best of Jacob's family, and on all accounts, the superficial is they appeared to be peaceable, even though Shechem had utterly disrespected the family of Jacob, and it should have been announced that he had done so and that he had done totally wrong, and he needed to be punished in some way by the city-state. But who would do that? Shechem seems to get what he wants. To give them the benefit of the doubt, Shechem and Hamor thought everything was positive in speaking to Jacob's family. The only thing that they really needed to do to get the city-state's approval of having the men of the city circumcised. That to the men was not a difficult issue, for they saw other benefits. Instead of making it seem as though they needed to give up other gods and so on, Simeon and Levi made it seem much easier just to get circumcised, and everything from then on would fall into place without any more sacrifices or consequences. However, that was not really true. In fact, what Simeon and Levi had planned was beyond what Hamor and Shechem had expected from them. They did not expect their explosive nature to come upon them during their weakest moment. Hamor and Shechem only expected the good and the positive, while Simeon and Levi had only expected the worst from the city-state, so they were out to conquer them for the evil acts that Shechem had done to their city, to their sister. The way it is presented is a great benefit to be able to get more wives from people who live close by, because they were making an agreement to it. Nothing in it seemed too impossible for their desires, had far exceeded the slight problem. At least that is what they had thought. And circumcision was the quote-unquote minor problem. In such a case, for those who serve God, one might think soberly in two different ways when such cases happen. What is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? So in evaluating both of these, how should people react and function accordingly? Shechem and Hamor actually blindly fell into a trap that was set by Simeon and Levi. Jacob himself had no inkling of the ideas of Levi and Simeon, and they themselves did not venture out to get approval or discuss it with their dad, as they did not want any disapproval on the matter and did not want themselves to be discouraged of what they thought was the best action at the time. The third day was coming on the horizon, and of course that would be the chosen day that Simeon and Levi would take their swords, go into the city, and during the men's most formidable weakness due to their circumcision, they would take their liberty to slaughter them all, taking the plunder, women, and children. Thus, in their eyes, it was taking the women of the city-state instead of losing their own, taking the plunder and not allowing the men to plunder them in any way. What they had probably thought was Shechem had already disrespectfully plundered Dinah. What more could the men of the city-state do to them? It was a way to avoid further disrespect and further plunder in that city-state way, and in their own means of themselves. Thus Levi and Simeon did what they had thought was the best thing to bring justice to Dinah and their own people. Verse 22 says, "Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised." Thus Hamor and Shechem are speaking, in essence, from the lips of Simeon and Levi in their deceitful way. They were manipulated in speaking for Simeon and Levi, encouraging the men of the city-state to do exactly as Levi and Simeon had planned, so as to bring about their weakness and an opportunity for Levi and Simeon to slaughter them very easily. The thought and the contract, if you will, was that to be one people, they only had to be circumcised. And that was it. But the rest, Levi and Simeon were not worried about, for they did not envision such a city-state to be continuing, but to find its extinction for the act of Shechem upon their family. In one sense, it looked so clean, for the family of Jacob was circumcised, that is, the males. So to become one people, the city-state men had to be circumcised too. And then the city-state males would have in future from that time choices of those whom they wished to marry without any repercussions. However, Simeon and Levi were not going to allow that to happen. For them to allow that to happen was likened unto allowing the city-state men to again violate or defile their daughters at any time they wished. Of course, what was not discussed in their culture of having them discuss matters before intercourse happens, without any repercussions on the part of what Shechem had done, it was likened unto rewarding his action, and that was an abhorrence to Levi and Simeon, at least, or to say the least. They certainly were not willing to reward such an action. Verse 23 says, "Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us." Not only did they believe that they could take of Jacob's daughters or women servants to become their wives, but they also thought that taking their cattle as their own was also part of the agreement. They lumped women and cattle in the same category as though they were expendable and easily gotten just for being circumcised. They did not explain nor discuss anything in regards to speaking to fathers before committing the act. Shechem did not bring that up. He avoided the talk of such matters, for it would have put him in a bad light. But he was following the tracks towards bad ethics. One of the things that Jacob's family probably adhered to was in regards to the cattle and such animals likened unto the wives. Each person had their own and took care of them as being in charge of them. However, what Shechem and Hamor were discussing, it looks as though there were no boundaries when the people had become one. They could act as though the cattle of Jacob were their own for the time being, that Jacob had worked for cattle from Laban. He received a lot of blessings that came from God by getting those cattle into himself, and even dealing with some of the antics of Laban. These four folks were also poor at ethics, we can say. It was likened unto having a group of people take away his cattle as though they were agreeing to it. Such nonsense. Verse 24 says, And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened all that went out of the gate of the city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of the city. And of course it is because of the fact that it looks so pleasing. The deceitful the deceitful way of getting their way is because it was nothing really to what they had to pay, and it was just the fact that they had to go through circumcision. Instead of fighting for who was going to control the people, they had thought that in listening to Jacob's family members and adhering to circumcision only without any repercussions for what Shechem had done, they were going to have what they wanted: more cattle to their clan members and women to choose from as wives. No repercussions for the shame brought upon Dinah, just a matter of making an agreement, making it look good. In essence, if it were rape, it was likened unto receiving great benefits for Shechem's decision for doing so. Therefore, had others decided the same, the family of Jacob would provide more benefits, and so on would be the case. Levi and Simeon had seen no end to that dilemma, so they had taken upon themselves to bring the repercussions upon the entire city-state, for their agreement among themselves must have, according to Simeon and Levi, been the same thought process of Shechem, in that they would receive in future no punishment or no repercussions for maltreatment of the women of Jacob's family. It was, in their eyes, a win-win situation. It was not just a discussion, it was something that, to Hamor and Shechem, they had put it into practice. The men of the city-state, all of them, had gotten circumcised, likened unto just doing something easily to get rewarded for the practice of fornication, humiliating someone else's family, violating a damsel's dignity. Shechem did not need to give anything to Jacob, nor anyone else for that matter. It was likened unto Shechem being rewarded for his bad behavior in expressing it in the least manner of expressing it. Therefore, all the men of the city-state, too, decided that Shechem was right, we can say, in the way that he treated the family of Jacob. They, too, could do also if they were just circumcised. They would get such good rewards. But Shechem had not been circumcised when he had done that against Dinah and the family of Jacob. Thus, he was not circumcised when he committed the act of fornication with Dinah. And there you have it. May God bless you in Jesus' name. Amen.